So you've decided to move to China? Well, here's a tip. So welcome to episode 1 of China Tips. Today we're going to be talking about where should you go. As you might know, China is a pretty big country. If you're familiar with geography, you'll know that China is about the same size as the United States of America. Now, a country of this scale is obviously going to have a lot of differences. Imagine if you are from New York and you move to Texas. There are quite a few cultural differences to get used to. Now, in China, multiply that by 1,000,000. Each provincial border is almost like its own country. So we're going to go through 5 easy points about each place to help you make your decision. The first region we're going to talk about is Dongbei, or Northeast China. Northeast China is cold, which brings me to my first point, the weather. In Northeastern China, it is cold. The Siberians whip through to create 8 months of winter. Are you ready for that? Well, if you're from Northern Europe or Canada or the Northern US, you might be okay. But for a lot of people, they can't quite hack it up there. It is really, really cold, with temperatures getting down to minus 40 degrees Celsius sometimes in the winter. Number 2, because of all that coldness, it is a heavy drinking culture. The culture of Dongbei is very interesting because the people love to drink. Bit more jovial, a lot less traditional than their southern counterparts. Dongbei people can be seen drinking baijiu at almost every meal, especially in the winter months. What else are you gonna do to get through those 8 months of freezing Siberian winters? Dongbei people are very straightforward and direct, which means that you can expect them to say what is on their mind. A lot less indirect than their eastern counterparts in Japan or South Korea or even southern China. Dongbei people are quite a bit more easygoing than their southern counterparts, which a lot of foreigners like. Another thing foreigners like is number 3, which is the food. The food in Dongbei is nourishing, it's rich, it's full of breads, stews, and meats, which a lot of foreigners find very comforting. Maybe you will as well. 4, the language. The language of Dongbei is probably its high point. Dongbei people speak Dongbei Hua, which isn't directly related to Mandarin, Standard Mandarin. If you come here to learn Chinese, Standard Mandarin is definitely the language that you're going to be going for. This makes Dongbei an ideal location for learning Chinese, even better than some places like Beijing. Number 5, the economy. You will make less money here. The economy is typically industrial, which means that there's less opportunities for us foreigners to make money in a region like this, unless you're just doing the normal education stuff. Let's go to our next region. Let's go a little bit more south and go to Eastern China. You might have heard of it. There's a little place there called Shanghai. Now, this little place has over 20 million people, and although a lot of people like to put Shanghai and China in the same sentence, in a way, it's not true. It's its own thing, it's its own deal. Eastern China is business oriented, but Eastern China is hot. In the summer months, it gets really, really hot, but there is respite in the winter and a bit of a cool down comes through. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these places in Eastern China don't have heating in the winter, which makes it very cold. The extreme temperatures here make a lot of people uncomfortable. The culture in Shanghai or in Eastern China is very business oriented. And another thing is materialism. People will be wearing the latest fashions, and you might think of China as a less rich place. You might think of China not as a poor country, but as less prosperous than the West. You'll change your mind in Eastern China. People here have money. Now, this makes most relationships and friendships, I don't want to say less genuine than their northern counterparts, but typically more business oriented. The food in Shanghai is varied, and the food in Eastern China as well. Although the Eastern Chinese cuisine is not adored by foreigners, it tends to be sweet and very small servings, which is the direct opposite of the northern people. There's a lot of international cuisine to be found, so you can expect to find most countries' cuisine and lots of Western chains, so you will be comfortable in this region. The language of Shanghai is very, very different than the rest of China. It's called the Wu dialect, and most people don't come here to learn that. However, Eastern China is quickly and rapidly beginning to pick up Mandarin. Although on the streets you'll hear the Wu dialect and many other dialects, Mandarin Chinese is the lingua franca now. So if you go there to learn Chinese and speak Chinese, you'll be all right. The economy is booming. In Eastern China, you'll rake in a lot more money. No matter what you do, your salary will be higher here. However, living costs are much, much higher. Let's go to region 3. This is where I am. Now I've lived in all of these places that I'm mentioning, but where I live now is southern China. Typically, when we talk about southern China, we're talking about the province of Guangdong. You might have heard of Hong Kong. Like Shanghai, it's kind of its own deal. And the rest of Guangdong province, although separate from Hong Kong with a border, shares a lot of influence. Guangdong is, do you remember what I said about Dongbei? Guangdong in southern China is hot. It is hot. It is hot like you can't imagine unless you're from a tropical country. It gets boiling hot here, and there's only a couple months in the winter where it's a little bit cooler. Expect everywhere to be air conditioned because it is unbearable. If it's not, you're gonna be in pain. The culture of southern China is like Eastern China or Shanghai in that it's business oriented, however, typically has its own special vibe. You may have heard the phrase Cantonese or Canton, and that's its own culture in itself. Cantonese culture is based on family ties, very Confucian in that respect. Much more traditional, Cantonese people, although having been open to the West for much longer and much more internationally minded, Cantonese people are very family oriented. So expect a traditional family culture. Food. Some people consider Cantonese food to be the best food in the world. Southern Chinese food varies throughout the provinces, and Guangdong obviously has Cantonese food. You might have heard of dim sum or something like that. Delicious, complex, and healthy. Cantonese food is delicious, and you can expect to go to dim sum quite often if you end up hanging out with Cantonese people. The restaurants tend to be open super late, and that's something I love about this place. The restaurants, a lot of them are open all night, so you can go find a bite to eat after you go out to the bar or whatever you're doing at those late hours. It's none of my business. The language scares away a lot of people because Cantonese is the lingua franca in many cities in Guangdong province. However, thankfully, due to the Chinese government's efforts to standardize Mandarin throughout the country, you can still get away with speaking Mandarin in a lot of cities. For example, like in Shenzhen, pretty much everyone speaks Mandarin as a way to get around. In some of the other cities like Shaoguan or Guangzhou, you'll hear quite a bit of Cantonese though, and it's a very, very different language. Some people actually pick it up when they're here, but Mandarin's definitely still more useful. The economy. The economy is strong here. You will make pretty good money. With its border and proximity to Hong Kong, there are a lot of businesses that come over to mainland China, and this is the hub. This is the jumping off point for many companies in China. Although a lot of sectors are saturated, the salaries here are much higher and the living costs not as high as many places in Eastern China. Okay, let's talk about the fourth location, Southwestern China. Southwestern China usually includes the provinces of Hunan, Guizhou, and Sichuan. These places are typically quite a bit poorer than the rest of China, so let's get into it. Number 1, the weather. Like Guangdong, it's pretty hot, and the winter months get a little bit colder than Guangdong. So very hot in the summer, a little bit cold, a little bit chilly in the winter. The culture of Southwestern China is hardworking. The people in Sichuan specifically are well known for working really, really hard. Now, although the education level in these provinces is a little bit lower than the rest of the country, that means that there's still a lot of manual labor there, and it leads to a friendly, outgoing nature. This areas of people do also like to drink a lot of baijiu, so get ready for some drinking culture. Number 3, the food. The food is spicy, very, very, very spicy. The polar opposite of Guangdong. There's a lot of chili used in this region. The language is Southwestern Mandarin. Southwestern Mandarin is a different language to the rest of China and has its roots in Standard Mandarin. You will hear this on the streets, and it is a bit slower to change because this place is a little bit separated from the rest of China. The people, although most are able to speak Mandarin Chinese, you'll hear a lot of Southwestern Mandarin on the streets. The economy here is lagging. Guizhou province in particular is the poorest province of China. Now, Hunan has some cities like Changsha that are doing okay, and Chengdu in Sichuan is booming. It's a beautiful, almost first world city. But in general, this region of China is a little bit poor, so salaries are lower. Although the economy is on the up and up, it's not the same as Eastern or Southern China. Last region here, Western China. We're gonna throw Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Tibet into this section. These provinces are wild. They are very, very different than the rest of China in that they have a significant minority population that has not intertwined with the Han majority yet. The weather here can be cold. It's much colder than the south, that's for sure, and dry, with deserts, mountains, sweeping landscapes. It's beautiful, but pretty forbidding. The cultures of these regions vary incredibly because the population is significantly minority population, Mongolian, Tibetan, Kazakh, Uyghur. There's many different minorities in this area that speak different languages and get along in a different way. So from a Chinese perspective, in terms of culture, it's incredibly different. You would almost have to look up the cultures of the neighboring regions like Outer Mongolia and the Central Asian regions that surround those provinces. The food of these regions is varied. A lot of meat up north in Inner Mongolia, so much meat, not too many vegetables, goat, mutton, lamb, it's very prevalent. And Mongolian hot pot, of course, which is really delicious. A big cauldron of broth dipping in various meats to cook them. Xinjiang and Gansu has a very Central Asian flair to it. Lots of spices, hand-pulled noodles, a delicious cuisine. Tibet is not really known for its food. There's a lot of yak meat there, and yak meat and dairy products. There's not too much going on in terms of cuisine there. The languages of these areas are varied. Mongolian is spoken in Inner Mongolia, but only by the Mongolian population. There's many languages in Xinjiang. Some of them even include Russian, Uyghur, Kazakh. So this can make living in this region a little more difficult, as Mandarin is much less prevalent. Tibet has the same issue. With significant Tibetan populations in most places, Tibetan is the lingua franca. But Mandarin is slowly creeping in as the Han people make their move. The economy of these places makes it very difficult to get a job. Although there's major cities like Baotou in Inner Mongolia, or Lanzhou in Gansu, or Urumqi in Xinjiang, and Lhasa in Tibet, these economies are quite big, and there are sectors for foreign employees. However, the salaries in these regions are incredibly low, and because of political instability, they're not highly recommended. Pollution tends to be bad in these regions as well, as a lot of factories are moved out there because they want to keep them away from the more populated regions of China. To sum it up, there are many places that you can move to in China. The regions are all completely different, and I've glossed over so many details. It's up to you to find out the rest. I hope you got a little better image on where you want to go in China. Do some more research. Follow some of the links in the description. Find out where you want to be in terms of weather, food, culture, language, and economy. Stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about the qualifications and the visa that you need to get to China and how to actually get that visa. So, you've decided to move to China? Now you've got a tip. Oh. Hey guys, you're in Huizhou. You don't know what to do? Come with me. We're going to Gaobang Mountain.